nice welcome to everybody. Welcome to this evening celebrating the work of Ukraine's national poet, Taras Shevchenko. Taras Shevchenko was born on the 9th of March, 1814, in Morinci. He was a political dissident, an artist, and is now considered to be the national poet of Ukraine. He was a man who rose above the economic, political, and personal wreckage of his time, and rose to influence the consciousness of an entire nation, a genius who popularized and gave a unique standing to the Ukrainian language, because to read his widely popular poems, you had to read them in Ukrainian. And at that time, that was a very important thing. Shevchenko was born into serfdom, orphaned at the age of 11, and his art would eventually buy him his freedom, but his brave words would repeatedly put him back into chains. Today, his words are as strong now as they were over 200 years ago.
12th in 1840, the Russian censor in St. Petersburg, Peter Korsovsky, gave permission to publish a small book of poetry by an unknown Ukrainian poet named Taras Shevchenko. The small format book, which duly appeared in 1840, although with censored passages, was entitled Kobzar. The title refers to blind Ukrainian musicians, often former Cossacks, who travelled through Ukraine singing epic poems and playing a stringed instrument called the Kobzar, which is a lute-like instrument, or the bandura, which is an example here. Shevchenko himself had often listened to Kobzar players in his childhood as they sang epic poems about legendary past of Ukraine, about Cossacks who defended their homeland from its enemies, and about the heroic figures of the peasant rebels. Like that of other prominent Slavonic Romantic poets, as well as poets of the Celtic nations, the poetry of Shevchenko is deeply rooted in folklore and oral history, passed from generation to generation. Ukrainian folklore, especially its historical epic poetry called Duми, is extremely rich and was fervently recollected by 19th century folklorists. In turn, many of Shevchenko's poems became part of Ukrainian folklore and were known by heart by numberless Ukrainians in the 19th century and beyond. Shevchenko is often referred to as Kobzar, the bard.
Any Ukrainian household, I'm sure that if we've got some locals here, if you go into their house, there will be a different copy of that book there. I could have brought one that was that size tonight, that was given to my mother at some point along the line.
From early childhood, Shevchenko had a passion for reading and for art learnt at the village school, and would use every scrap of paper he could lay his hands on to use for writing poetry or sketching. At the age of 15, he had to work as a serf on the estate of Pavlo Engelhardt as a personal servant. In 1829, he had to leave Ukraine in the retinue of his master via Kiev to Vilna and then St. Petersburg. Every free moment of his young life he secretly devoted to sketching and copying any prints he could get hold of, often incurring his master's wrath and punishment. Engelhardt wanted to own a trained portrait painter, and so Shevchenko was sent to study painting. In 1832, 1 year after arrival in St. Petersburg, he was apprenticed to the painter Vasily Shirayev. 3 years later, he met fellow countryman and artist Ivan Sashenko, who was studying at the Academy of Arts. This was a life-changing meeting, as Shevchenko became enthusiastic about Shevchenko's abilities and introduced him to important intellectuals and artists who were instrumental in furthering his studies. Among these was famous painter Karl Brylov, who together with the poet Vasily Zhukovsky raised 2,500 rubles to buy Shevchenko's freedom in 1838. The influence of Brylov laid the foundations of his artistic technique in Shevchenko's early St. Petersburg days. He was very successful at the Academy and won several medals. Apart from oil paintings and watercolours, he also produced illustrations for a number of books. And his drawings for one of them were engraved on steel by a prominent London engraver, J.A. Harrison, later a member of the Royal Academy. In 1843, Shevchenko produced etchings of Shakespeare's King Lear using the technique of galvanography, a way of producing galvanic copper plates for printing. Shevchenko became a portraitist as well as a painter of landscapes and historical canvases, and some of his early works were geophysical. His careful and accurate draftsmanship, attention to detail, and ability to seize and reproduce a slightly stylized likeness were the results of Brylov's precept and example. Between 1838 and 1847, he passed through his period of apprenticeship to art, working mainly at the St. Petersburg Academy. By 1840, he was already illustrating books with engravings, and his subsequent visits to Ukraine provided him with practice in portraiture and with fresh impressions. While living in St. Petersburg, Shevchenko made 3 trips to Ukraine in 1843, 1845, and 1846. The difficult conditions Ukrainians had made a profound impact on him. In 1844, distressed by the condition of Ukrainian regions in the Russian Empire, Shevchenko decided to capture some of his homeland's historical ruins and cultural monuments in an album of etchings which he called Picturesque Ukraine. Only the first 6 etchings were printed because of the lack of means to continue. An album of watercolours from historical places and pencil drawings was done in 1845. In 1847, while in exile by Nicholas I, he was sent on forced march from St. Petersburg to Orenburg and Orsk. The orders were that Shevchenko be under the strictest surveillance without the right to write or paint. In 1848, he was semi-officially allowed to sketch and made admirable use of his keen vision to solve the mystery of light and shade, which had fascinated him in the sunlight of Ukraine and now possessed him in the more intense light of the Caspian sands. His natural curiosity was attracted to landscape, and ethnographic detail, although he could still practice portraiture by depicting himself. The work he did in exile is chiefly in watercolour and pencil, although there are works in oils as well. His choice of theme shows that he had largely outgrown his taste for romantic and literary subjects, and now prefers, as in his diary and stories, to reproduce the seen and the known. Soldiers, the Kyrgyz, especially the Kyrgyz children, and the sun-scorched arid landscapes with their wide expanses, rugged bluffs, and red vegetation feature in the exiled Shevchenko sketches and paintings. When he returned to the capital in 1858, he brought with him a set of illustrations to the parable of the prodigal son, not in the Bryullov style, but modernised and given artistic touches, like the verse adaptations of the scriptures which he made in later years. The transition from Romanticism to realism, which represents a change in European art and thought in the middle of the 19th century, may therefore be followed as plainly in Shevchenko's painting as in his literary work. Of note is Shevchenko's friendship with the African-American actor Ira Aldridge, whom he first met at the Mariinsky Theatre in St. Petersburg in 1858. Despite the language barrier, the two had in common empathy towards people who had been suppressed and enslaved. We can follow through his self-portraits the transition of his life from the youthful, romanticised Taras through his years of freedom, the years of exile, right up to the end of his life in 1861.
We've now got two lovely young ladies who are going to read a poem by Taras Shevchenko. The poem is Sadok Vishnevi, The Cherry Orchard, and it's going to be read in Ukrainian and in English by these two lovely young ladies.
Садок вишневий коло хати, груші над вишнями гудуть, плуготарі з плугами йдуть, співають ідучі дівчата, а матері вечеря ждуть. Сім'я вечеря коло хати, вечірня зіронька встає, дочка вечеря подає, а мати хоче навчити, так соловейка не дає. Поклала мати коло хати маленьких діточок своїх, сама заснула коло їх. Затихло все, тільки дівчата та соловейки не затих. The cherry orchards by the house, above the cherries beetle sob. The ploughman ploughed the fertile ground, and girls sing songs pass by. It's evening, mother calls them home. The family stops by the house, the star shines in the evening show. The daughter serves the evening meal, trying to give lessons. Mother tries, but can't, she blames the nightingale. It's dark, it's getting dark, and by the house, mother lays her young to sleep. Beside them she too fell asleep. All now went still, and just the girl and nightingale their vision keep.
Taras Shevchenko wrote that poem to remind him of his homeland when he was being held in exile, and that reminded him of what it was like to be at home by the cherry orchard, the mother calling in her children for their evening meal. Lots of Shevchenko's poems were put to music as well, and we'll hear some of that in a little minute. But that is one of my favourite because it was sung as a lullaby, it was created as a lullaby. And when my little girl wouldn't go to sleep, I used to sit and sing that to her. So it's got a nice little meaning for me, that one. So we're moving on to Shevchenko worldwide. Now throughout the world, there are 1,374 Shevchenko statues all over the world. I think the only country that hasn't really got one is England. So maybe we should sort that one out. Start the collection now. There are many monuments to Shevchenko throughout Ukraine, most notably his memorial in Kharkiv, and in the centre of Kyiv. Thank you. that bears his name, and in the Kyiv metro station. The first statues of Shevchenko were created in the Soviet Union as part of the Ukrainianization policies. The first one was revealed in Romney in 1918, when the city was located in the Ukrainian state. And then we've got some that were even created in Moscow. After Ukraine gained its independence in the wake of the 1991 Soviet collapse, some Ukrainian cities replaced their statues of Lenin. I think if you've ever been to the Eastern Bloc, you'll see that they like putting up statues to lots of important people. And there were always statues to Lenin and to Stalin. And so lots of them came down and lots of Shevchenkos went up. Although the relationship between Ukraine and Russia is currently tense, there is still a monument erected in his name in the city of St. Petersburg, which was rebuilt with the new materials replacing the old one in 2000. Outside of Ukraine and the former USSR, monuments to Shevchenko have been put up in many countries, usually under the initiative of local Ukrainian diasporas. So that doesn't say much for our diaspora, does it? Yeah. No. There are several memorial societies and monuments to him throughout Canada and the United States. Most notably, a monument in Washington, D.C., and the granite monument was carved by Vincent Iluzzi of Barre, Vermont. The Washington, D.C. monument was designed by Ukrainian-Canadian sculptor. There's also a monument in Soyuzivka in New York State. Lots in Canada and America, because there is a very large Ukrainian population there. There's even a statue of Taras Shevchenko at the Ukrainian Square in Curitiba in Brazil. And as a monument to Shevchenko was put up in Zagreb in Croatia, and also one in Armenia. So throughout the world, wherever there is Ukrainians, then we will usually find a statue of Shevchenko. Now, as I said, lots of his words have been put to music. This is a bandura. I can't tell you very much about the instrument. But Maria, would you like to see an instrument it's got? 30-odd strings of it, or 56. And my friend Maria, she's not going to do it today, she's very shy, but actually learned how to play the bandura. And this bandura belongs to my friend Lydia's son, beautiful instrument.
Ірина said, our first tune of our newly formed orchestra, we last played 11 years ago at Taras Shevchenko's national event to commemorate 150 years of the death. He died in 1861, and we did a very big concert at the Dnipro Roars in Leicester to commemorate his life and also commemorate 150 years of the death of Taras Shevchenko. That's the last time we played. So, he then thought it'd be a good idea to have another go tonight, so we hope you enjoy it. Margaret.
Shevchenko's most important poems was Brati Mої. And again, that's reminding people, that's why Shevchenko is so much a part of today, to remind everyone about the roots, where they come from. It doesn't matter who you are, where you belong, don't forget where you come from. So I might have been born here, I'm not going to forget my roots. My daughter was born here, but I will teach her and make sure that she doesn't forget where she comes from. And it doesn't matter if you're Welsh or you're Scottish or you're Indian, whoever you may be, the country that you were born in is the country you were born in. Oh, my voice is going terribly. But never forget where you come from.
Translates into something like this. Educate yourselves, my brothers. Think, read, learn from others, but do not shun your own. For he who forgets his mother will be punished by God. Strangers will avoid you and not allow you in their homes. Our own children will become strangers. For evil will permeate the whole earth, and nowhere on this boundless earth will be a joyful home.
On to Shevchenko and his relevance in today's everlasting struggle. As most of you will have seen and heard, Ukraine is in a very critical position now, with Russia and its 100,000 troops on the border. We hope that nothing will come from this. We hope that diplomacy and sensibility will prevail and that Ukraine will not be invaded and will be allowed to make its own decisions about what it wants for its future. Some of the slides that you're seeing up here now are taken from the last struggle that Ukraine had during its Maidan, its peaceful revolution, if you want to call it that. And again, you've got boritися поборете, fight for what you need to for what you want, and God will help you. And so these are images that we use, that Taras Shevchenko was used as that image to fight for what you believe in.
translate it for you. The Mighty Dnipro Roars, translated by John Weir, 1961. The mighty Dnipro roars and bellows. The wind in anger howls and raves. Down to the ground it bends the willows, and mountain high lifts up the waves. The pale-faced moon picked out this moment, to peek out from behind the cloud, like a canoe upon the ocean. It first tips up, and then tips down. The cocks have not proclaimed the morning, there's not a sound as yet of man. The owls in glades call out their warnings, and ash trees creak and creak again.
Думи мої, квіти мої, діти, виростав вас, доглядав вас. Де ж мені вас діти? В Україну і діти, в нашу Україну, побітиню, сиротами, а я тут загину.
Oh, my dear thoughts, troubling you are to me. Why have you appeared on paper in oh such sad roads? Why doesn't the wind scatter you all into the steppe like the dust? Why did trouble not lull you like its own dear child? Oh, my dear thoughts, oh, my thoughts, flowers, my dear children, I nurtured you, looked after you. What shall I do with you? Into Ukraine go my children, destitute, all orphaned, and I will die here.
Petersburg on the 10th of March 1861. He was originally buried in St. Petersburg. However, fulfilling his wishes in his last testament, his remains were transferred and reburied on the 8th of May on Monk's Hill overlooking the river Dnipro at Kanu. And can I just say here that members of Hoverla, on one of our tours of Ukraine, were privileged to be able to go to Kanu where he's buried and to visit the monument to Shevchenko. Taras Shevchenko died 7 days before the 1861 emancipation of serfs. His works and his lives are revered by Ukrainians throughout the world, and his impact in Ukrainian literature is immense.
Just going back to what Nadia, her beautiful rendition of the poem brought tears to my eyes, because many years ago the organisation of Ukrainian women were asked to recite a poem which was then recorded. My late mother was blind at the time and couldn't read anything, but she didn't need to. It was just like Nadia said, the recording of my mother reading it without needing to see it because she knew it by heart. And she was 90, so it's just amazing. And it's nice to see today that the youngsters are carrying on, you know, with the songs of Shevchenko, that young lad singing. It was just beautiful. But if any of you can manage to find on YouTube anywhere the male voice choir of the Dnipro River, Reveta Storne, it's well worth listening to because it brings you out in goose pimples. It's just such an amazing song. Anyway, enough of that. This is my turn. And this is Testament, Zapowiedź, written by Taras Shevchenko on actually Christmas Day in 1845 when he was quite poorly. So maybe that's why he was writing this poem. And also it's been translated, I believe, into 150 languages throughout the world, so that says something, doesn't it? When I die, then make my grave high on an ancient mound, in my own beloved Ukraine, in stepland without bound, whence one may see wide-skirted wheatland, Dnipro's steep cliff shore, there, where one may hear the blustering river wildly roar, till from Ukraine to the blue sea it bears in fierce endeavour the blood of foemen. Then I'll leave wheatland and hills forever, leave all behind, soar up until before the throne of God I'll make my prayer, for till that hour I shall know naught of God. Make my grave there and arise, sundering your chains, bless your freedom with the blood of foemen's evil veins. Then in that great family, a family new and free, do not forget, with good intent, speak quietly of me.